Richard Farnsworth was 79 years old when he became the oldest Best Actor nominee in Oscar history. He'd spent 4 decades falling off horses for other men's glory, didn't speak his first real screen line until nearly 60, and 6 months after receiving a standing ovation at the Academy Awards, he ended his own life at a ranch in New Mexico. This is the story of a stable boy who became an invisible legend, a stuntman who outlasted every star he ever doubled, and an actor who proved that the longest wait can produce the most extraordinary performance. Richard William Farnsworth was born on the 1st of September 1920 in Los Angeles, California. His father was an engineer, his mother a homemaker, and for 7 years, life was ordinary. Then, his father died, leaving a 7-year-old boy in a household of women during the worst economic collapse in American history. There was no money, no safety net, no father, but there were horses. Richard learned to ride at 10, and something clicked. The kid who struggled in every classroom discovered that on a horse, he didn't need textbooks. He needed balance, courage, and guts. By 15, he'd dropped out of school entirely and taken work as a stable boy at a Los Angeles polo barn, mucking stalls for $5 a week. That was his entire world. Then in 1937, Paramount Pictures placed an ad in a Los Angeles newspaper looking for 200 writers for a film called Marco Polo. The pay was $7 a day, serious money for a kid earning $5 a week. Farnsworth answered that ad, rode for 5 straight weeks, and earned enough to buy his first car. He had no idea he'd just stepped into a career that would last 63 years. His first screen appearance came in 1938's The Adventures of Marco Polo, starring Gary Cooper. His job title was essentially body on a horse. He was one of 500 extras dressed as Mongolian horsemen, thundering across the Paramount backlot in leather armor and fur hats. No one knew his name. No one needed to. But Farnsworth could ride like almost nobody else on that lot. He could fall, fight from the saddle, and swap horses at full gallop. The stunt coordinators took notice, and one uncredited job at a time, the stable boy from the polo barn became Hollywood's most dependable horseman. By 1937, he'd ridden in the Marx Brothers' A Day at the Races. By 1939, he was doubling riders in Gunga Din and thundering through battle sequences on Gone with the Wind, shots that became some of the most iconic frames in cinema history. Richard Farnsworth received credit for none of it. He wasn't an actor, not even a named stuntman, just a rider directors could count on to gallop through fire or take a fall that would hospitalize anyone less capable. By the mid-1940s, he'd become the go-to stunt double at Republic Studios, the factory that cranked out westerns and B-movies faster than any other lot in Hollywood. His most important client was Roy Rogers, the king of the cowboys himself. For nearly a decade, every time Rogers leaped from a balcony, crashed through a saloon window, or took a punch that sent him flying over a hitching post, that was Farnsworth doing the work. Here's the detail that tells you everything about how Hollywood operated back then. Farnsworth sometimes earned a bigger paycheck than the actors he doubled. The work was so dangerous and so specialized that the man nobody saw on screen was getting paid more than the man whose name was on the marquee. And Rogers wasn't his only star. Over 3 decades, Farnsworth doubled Kirk Douglas, Henry Fonda, Montgomery Clift, Gary Cooper, Steve McQueen, and Guy Madison. He stood in for Madison across the entire run of the 1950s television series, Wild Bill Hickok, and again for the Legend of the Lone Ranger in theaters. He drove a chariot in Cecil B. DeMille's The 10 Commandments, doubled Henry Fonda in The Tin Star, and changed horses at full gallop alongside Charlton Heston in a Pony Express picture. One wrong move on that last stunt meant a broken neck. 300 films, 3 decades. Still nobody knew his name. Then came Spartacus. In 1960, Stanley Kubrick was shooting the picture at Universal Studios, and it was enormous. Thousands of extras, months of filming, some of the most complex battle sequences ever put together for an American production. Farnsworth was hired as a stunt gladiator, spending 11 months on the backlot in a short Roman tunic, fighting in arena scenes and riding horses through the slave revolt sequences. He talked about it later with a grin that barely hid the frustration underneath. "For 16 months, I wore this short little skirt with my bony knees knocking on the backlot of Universal. I looked about as much like a gladiator as my granddaughter, but I held my own." Spartacus won 4 Academy Awards. Farnsworth got no credit whatsoever. But the experience lit something in him. The stunt world had no real organization, no collective voice, no way to push for safety or fair pay. So in 1961, he co-founded the Stuntmen's Association of Motion Pictures. It was the first time his name meant something in this industry, not as a double, but as someone fighting for the people who risk their lives behind other actors' close-ups. The uncredited work kept coming through the 60s and into the 70s. Blazing Saddles, Papillon, The Outlaw, Josie Wales. He worked alongside John Ford, Howard Hawks, and Sam Peckinpah. But after nearly 40 years of invisibility, could a man pushing 60 actually become something more than a body double? Before we get to that, there's something worth knowing about Richard Farnsworth. He wasn't playing a cowboy. He was one. From the late 1930s through 1946, he competed on the professional rodeo circuit, riding broncs and roping cattle for prize money whenever the film work ran dry. He married Margaret Hill in 1947, and they raised 2 children together. Their son Diamond followed his father into stunt work and went on to become a respected stunt coordinator on shows like Quantum Leap and NCIS. Their daughter was named Missy. Farnsworth lived on ranches his entire adult life, riding horses every single day until his body simply wouldn't allow it anymore. He carried a quiet, old-fashioned dignity that Hollywood couldn't fake, and he told Roger Ebert exactly who he was in one line. "I've never had to curse in a movie, and I'm not about to start now." Over 60 films with speaking roles, 0 profanity. In an industry that rewarded shock and edge, he just refused to budge on that, even when it would have been easy to. By the mid-1970s, his body had taken enough punishment from decades of falls, fights, and horse wrecks. At roughly 55, he walked away from stunt work and started chasing speaking roles. His first real part came in 1976 as a stagecoach driver in The Duchess and the Dirtwater Fox, alongside Goldie Hawn and George Segal. It was a small role, but for the first time in nearly 4 decades, Richard Farnsworth's face was the point. Could a 56-year-old former stuntman with no formal training actually make Hollywood believe he belonged on screen? In 1978, director Alan J. Pakula cast him in Comes a Horseman, a drama set in the 1940s American West, starring Jane Fonda and James Caan. Farnsworth played Dodger, an aging ranch hand and quiet father figure to Fonda's character. No stunts, no horse tricks, just emotion, which was something nobody had ever asked of him in 40 years of Hollywood work. What came next stunned everyone who saw it. His performance was so natural, so completely unforced, that critics struggled to call it acting at all. This was a real cowboy simply being himself, and the camera couldn't look away. On the 9th of April 1979, at the 51st Academy Awards, Richard Farnsworth was nominated for Best Supporting Actor. He was 58 years old. He'd been working in Hollywood since 1937, and the industry that had treated him as a background fixture for 4 decades had finally woken up to what it had been ignoring all along. He lost the Oscar to Christopher Walken for The Deer Hunter, but he walked away with the National Board of Review Award and shared the National Society of Film Critics Award for Best Supporting Actor. The production had come at a cost. On the 18th of August, 1977, near Canyon City, Colorado, stuntman Jim Shepard was killed performing a horse drag through a wooden gate, a stunt he was doing as a stand-in for Jason Robards. The scene made the final cut, edited just before the fatal moment. For Farnsworth, a man who'd spent decades doing that exact kind of work, Shepard's death hit differently. It was a reminder of everything he'd survived, and everything so many others hadn't. He'd proven he could act, but could anyone really build a leading career starting at 60? Number 7. The Gentleman Bandit Who Changed Everything. In 1982, a 29-year-old Canadian director named Philip Borsos offered Farnsworth the role of a lifetime. The film was The Grey Fox, the true story of Bill Miner, a gentlemanly stagecoach robber released from San Quentin after 33 years inside. Confused by the modern world, Miner wanders into a cinema, watches the great train robbery, and gets inspired. He starts robbing trains in British Columbia and becomes a folk hero. Farnsworth wasn't the first choice. Harry Dean Stanton had been cast, with ads already running his name, but Stanton left to appear in Francis Ford Coppola's One from the Heart, and Farnsworth stepped in. The Grey Fox cost roughly $4.5 million and grossed over $5.5 million. It won 7 Genie Awards, including Best Actor for Farnsworth. He also took the London Film Critics Circle Actor of the Year, tied with James Mason, and picked up a Golden Globe nomination for Best Actor in a Drama. The film holds a rare 100% on Rotten Tomatoes. As Roger Ebert noted, it was Richard Farnsworth's first starring role. At age 62, the man had spent 44 years in Hollywood before anyone trusted him to carry a film. When they finally did, he delivered something that became a landmark of an entire country's cinema. But fame at 62 comes with a cruel asterisk. How many years did he really have left to enjoy what he'd earned? Number 8. The Quiet Man Who Stole Every Scene. The Grey Fox opened doors that had been locked for 4 decades. Through the 1980s and 1990s, Farnsworth became one of Hollywood's most beloved character actors. The kind of man directors called when they needed someone to walk onto a set and make everyone else look like they were still figuring it out. In 1984, Richard Farnsworth played Red Blow, the quiet assistant coach, alongside Robert Redford's legendary slugger in The Natural. A year later, he brought Matthew Cuthbert to life in the Canadian miniseries Anne of Green Gables. A shy and tender adoptive father whose warmth earned him a Gemini Award and locked in his reputation as the most effortlessly believable actor of his generation. Rob Reiner cast him in Misery in 1990 as Sheriff Buster, the decent lawman who goes looking for James Caan's character and ends up murdered by Kathy Bates's Annie Wilkes. That character wasn't in Stephen King's novel. Reiner invented him specifically because he needed a death that would gut the audience. It worked. The film pulled in over $61 million. His credits kept stacking up, including The Two Jakes, Havana, The Getaway, Lassie, and a role in the landmark 1977 miniseries Roots. In the Pacific Northwest, he became an unlikely icon as the groundskeeper who spotted the mythical artesians in the long-running Olympia beer commercials. On the 17th of August, 1992, he got a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame at 1560 Vine Street. The boy who once mucked stalls for $5 a week had his name pressed into concrete on Hollywood Boulevard. Then on the 7th of October, 1998, a phone call arrived from the most unexpected director in America. What did David Lynch see in a 78-year-old retired cowboy that no one else could have spotted? Back in 1994, a 73-year-old Iowa man named Alvin Strait got word that his brother Lyle had suffered a stroke. The two hadn't spoken in years over a falling out neither could fully recall. Alvin's eyesight was too poor to drive, and he had no license, but he wasn't going to let his brother die without seeing him one last time. So he climbed onto a 1,966 John Deere riding lawnmower and drove 240 miles from Lawrence, Iowa, to Blue River, Wisconsin. The journey took 6 weeks. David Lynch, the director behind Blue Velvet, Twin Peaks, and Mulholland Drive, read that story and saw something no one expected from the king of cinematic surrealism. He saw a simple, beautiful account of stubbornness, love, and the need to fix things before it's too late. Lynch didn't need an actor who could perform. He needed someone who could sit on that mower and make an audience believe they were watching a real old man crawl across the American heartland on a machine that topped out at 5 miles per hour. Lynch needed Farnsworth badly enough that the man came out of a 2-year retirement for the part. He spoke with Alvin Straight's sons to prepare, and the connection he felt went beyond research. Farnsworth himself walked with 2 canes because of deteriorating hips. Like Alvin, he was a man who knew his time was running short. What the crew didn't know was that he was dying. Metastatic prostate cancer had spread to his bones and spine. Some days the pain was so bad he could barely get to his feet, but when the cameras rolled, his performances were so quietly devastating that the whole set would fall silent. On the 15th of February, 2000, Farnsworth received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. At 79 years and 167 days old, he became the oldest person ever nominated in that category, a record that held for 21 years. He also took home the New York Film Critics Circle Award and the Independent Spirit Award for Best Male Lead. At the 72nd Academy Awards on the 26th of March 2000, host Billy Crystal called his nomination one of the great stories of the evening. Farnsworth lost the Oscar to Kevin Spacey for American Beauty. But something far heavier than disappointment was sitting behind that weathered smile. By the summer of 2000, his cancer had become unbearable. He was partially paralyzed. The pain never stopped. The man who had spent 63 years surviving every fall and every stunt now faced the one thing he couldn't endure his way through. On the 6th of October, 2000, 1 month and 5 days after his 80th birthday, and exactly 6 months after his final night at the Academy Awards, Richard Farnsworth ended his own life with a self-inflicted gunshot wound at his ranch in Lincoln, New Mexico. His fiancée, Julie Van Valen, was at the home. Lincoln County Sheriff Tom Sullivan confirmed it was self-inflicted. Van Valen later said Farnsworth knew he was riddled with cancer and had simply decided it was time. He didn't want to become a burden to the people he loved, and that is the detail that never leaves you once you know it. 20 years before his death, Farnsworth had stood alongside Steve McQueen in Tom Horn, playing rancher John C. Coble, the man who fought to clear the real Tom Horn's name. The film closes on a quote, defending Horn's innocence. That quote came from Coble's own suicide note. Farnsworth played a man who ended his own life, and 2 decades later, broken by pain he couldn't survive, he made the same choice. Whether that connection crossed his mind in those final hours, no one will ever know. He's buried next to his wife, Maggie, at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in the Hollywood Hills. Maggie died on the 7th of August, 1985, after 38 years together. In death, they're side by side again. Farnsworth spent 63 years in Hollywood. He appeared in over 300 films, doubled for the biggest names of the 20th century, and co-founded an organization that protected stunt performers doing the most dangerous work in the business. He never cursed on screen. He never stopped being himself. When Hollywood finally looked at him clearly, it found one of the most naturally gifted performers American cinema has ever produced. He waited 40 years for his moment, and when it arrived, he showed the world he'd been ready the whole time. If his story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel and keep coming back, because the golden age of Hollywood is full of people like Richard Farnsworth who never got nearly enough of the spotlight they earned. See you in the next one.